and its subsidiaries for the year 2023. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government to the 13th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of the management and operations of the Housing Development Corporation, HDC, including the restructuring of HDC into 3 distinct state enterprises.
Questions?
Senator Mark.
To the Minister of Health. In light of reports of the death of another baby at the neonatal intensive care unit of the Port of Spain General Hospital, can the Minister state whether this latest death will form part of the HOR investigation?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the question. Mr. President, in discussions through the PS with PAHO on this issue, because I have not inserted myself into the investigation, I did not interfere with it. I am advised that PAHO can include it on 2 counts. 1, time proximity to the original cluster, and 2, if the case definition, the clinical case definition of this case matches those. That is how they may include it. Mr. President, before I take my seat, and I condole with the new family on this, I want to recognize the intelligence of the average man in the street who is not being swayed by irresponsible arguments. I want to also recognize the sober voices like the Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association and those more responsible voices who are now adding their weight to this matter. They are bringing a sense of clarity to the issue. And whilst we focus on those who have passed, and we must, I want to thank healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, technicians, lab techs, patient care escorts, security guards, because we still bring to life all those preterm babies, 500 grams and more, that goes unnoticed. And we must, whilst we must recognize that we have one major issue in one ward, in one hospital, the entire healthcare system continues to function because of the dedication of all our professionals. And I think the country should recognize that. And I think the average man in the street, by their responses to me, have
a seat. Minister, 1, the time for answering the urgent question has ended. 2, Senator Naked, please control your outbursts. Senator Mark.
In light of the confession of negligence on the part of the Minister, can I ask...
I made no confession of negligence. I asked for that to be withdrawn.
Mr. President, he's interrupted.
Have a seat. Have a seat. So again, you have a supplemental to ask?
Yes.
Ask the question.
Mr. President, through you, I'd like to ask the following question. Can the Honourable Minister indicate what immediate steps will be taken, given what he has just indicated, to avoid further trauma, pain to parents through what I would like to call the implementation?
Minister, we've got the question, Senator Mark. Minister.
And Mr. President, it is exactly that type of rhetoric that the country is starting to see through as being self-serving and ought to be condemned in the most vigorous manner. As both North Central and myself said when this issue first came to light, Northwest went through above and beyond their usual sanitization cycles to ensure, as far as humanly possible, that there is no reoccurrence. But what is happening now, there is so much misinformation being put out there. And I'll give an example, because it is important that the public knows this. What made it into the media was that a private sector hospital called Sanjivani may have been the cause of the infection. And as I said yesterday, Sanjivani had nothing to do with this. And that is what is being perpetuated by this line of reasoning from those opposite. They have already poured scorn on the PAHO report. It has not even been submitted, but they are already questioning the veracity and independence of PAHO, much as they did with the Simanga report. And when they found 2 items in the Simanga report that they could latch on to, all of a sudden the Simanga report became their cause célèbre. But before, a doctor called Tim Gopi Singh was pouring scorn on the Simanga report even before they submitted. And this is the same playbook being done now with the PAHO report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mark.
As the new Minister of Debt,
No, Senator Mark, have a seat.
Mr. President.
No, don't do that. Senator Mark, raise to your feet, retract that statement, and apologize. That will not be tolerated inside here.
well, I withdraw, sir.
All I want to hear at this point in time, Senator Mark, is a retraction and an apology for that statement.
I withdraw and I humbly apologize.
Ask your supplementer.
Let me ask the minister who I will describe on a platform as what I just said here. Let me ask
Senator
Through
Mark,
you, Mr.
ask a question.
Mr. President, can the minister indicate what concrete steps, measures have been taken by his ministry and himself to ensure that he is not involved directly or indirectly in navigating this report that will finally be produced
Senator
by
Mark,
PAHO.
Senator
We'd like
Mark,
the minister to indicate
Senator Mark,
how.
I will not allow that question. Have a
Yeah.
seat. Next question on the order paper for urgent
Yes.
questions.
Babies are dying here, man.
Senator Mark, when I call for the
Yes.
next question on the order paper, just move to it.
Yes.
Leave all of the extra stuff out. Continue.
I'm a parent, you know, sir, like you.
Senator Mark, continue.
Hurt my heart. To the Minister of National Security. Given the assurance made by the minister at yesterday's sitting of the Senate and the subsequent news release issued by UDICOT, can the minister provide the reasons for the postponement of the opening of the Point Fortin fire station?
Minister of National Security.
Much, Mr. President.
Have a seat, Minister. Members, allow the minister to answer the question as posed by Senator Mark without the crosstalk getting to a level that I cannot hear him. Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I am more than happy to report that although today's ceremonial opening of the Point Fortin fire station has been rescheduled, the officer in charge of the men and women who will be stationed there has moved in, and the men and women continue, they began recently, the process of moving in, so ready for business. The place is. I am advised by UDICOT that due to event logistics, they had to reschedule the ceremonial opening to a short new date, and I, as minister, complied. This was a UDICOT, or this is a UDICOT project. Meanwhile, again, as I did yesterday, and reaffirmed today, the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service remains available. There was the station, because of the dilapidated condition of the building in which it occupied, the officers, they moved to another location in the vicinity So they remain, as I speak to you, available to the calls and emergency calls in particular from the people of Point 14 and environs. I thank you.
Honourable Senators, the time for urgent questions has expired.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the government is in a position to answer questions number 63, number 93, number 94, number 95, number 65, number 66, number 67, number 92, number 96, number 97, and number 98, all of the questions for oral answer on the order paper. Thank you.
Senator Mark.
Guide me, Mr. President. I see a number of questions coming before me. So can you tell me which one? 63. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 63 to the Minister of National Security.
Mr. President, based on information received from the Commissioner of Prisons, I advise as follows. In the prison service's ongoing attempts to ensure the safety and security of the nation's people, the prison service continues to introduce, upgrade, and maintain security systems which would be effective in deeming our establishments as secure, but mitigating any and all avenues for the passage of illegal, contraband, and unauthorized communication. Our most recent efforts are inclusive of the following: installation of jammers at our prisons in the second half of 2023. However, cell phone jammers in prisons can only prevent unauthorized communication via cell phones, since other means of communication pose innate challenges, such as personal visits and letters. During these visits, inmates find more innovative ways using coded language to meet their desired means. The prison service is acting daily to prevent illegal communications. Targeting of suspected officers. Regular and thorough searches are conducted randomly in response to intelligence received. For the year ending 2023, 6 prison officers were arrested and charged for possession of prohibited articles under the Miscellaneous Provision Law Enforcement Act, which we brought and passed here as Act number 25 of 2019. For the year 2024 to date, 2 prison officers are currently before the courts charged with possession of prohibited articles. Prison searches. Searches are conducted on a routine and ongoing basis. At times, these searches are conducted with the assistance of other law enforcement agencies. For the year ending 2023, there were 411 cell phones confiscated. This contrasts with previous years when numbers were in the thousands. And this cell phone problem in jail, as I read up to this morning, is not confined to Trinidad and Tobago. It exists everywhere in the world. It is a real phenomenon and problem. Searching of prison officers, regular searches of prison officers, because we are sure from the records of the even recent past that prison officers, as officers of the state, have been part of this problem. So we search them, we scan them on a regular and ongoing basis. We have established the prison interdiction team, and their purpose is to pay attention to their colleagues who fall prey, as some previous government ministers have in this country, and others in many disciplines and professions. So that is one of the ways in which we treat with them. The issue of drones. Drones have become a medium to transport contraband items, a new development. including cell phones into the prison. They pose particular challenges given their speed, acceleration, and capacity for covert operations. Collaboration with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Services Air Support Unit has been an initiative to help alleviate this issue, and we have other ways in dealing with it to relatively strong and good success. Mr. President, those are some of the ways in which we are treating with the matter raised by the Honourable Senator. I thank you.
Senator Mark.
Mr. President, can I ask the Honourable Minister, given all the measures identified by the Honourable Minister, how has this, or how have these measures contributed to a reduction in the issuing of hits or contract killings from behind prison walls? Can the minister indicate to this Parliament what has been the efficacious effect or outcome of the measures?
Minister.
Mr. President, to me it's basic that these measures are largely interdictory and preventive. It is difficult, I would admit, to measure the preventative aspect of the work that the security forces do. Similar to what I heard with the Ministry of Health. They deal with babies by the thousands. They deal with many babies, hundreds, who have physical challenges at birth, and the neonatal unit is to deal with them to varying levels of success. So I understand that we do, like every other state, have a problem with murders, with hits being called, and action, as I have described, has been and is being taken to treat with it to, as I say, great success. And one just has to imagine that without these measures, whichever government is in power, in the absence of these measures, God knows what our circumstances would have been like. Thank you.
Mr. President, seeing that the minister has indicated that drones have become a very powerful device to transport contraband goods, including cell phones, into our prison walls or behind prison walls so that prisoners can have access to see.
What's the question, Senator Mark?
Can the minister indicate, Mr. President, what concrete measures are being taken by the state to ward off the abuse and misuse of these instruments to undermine national security in TNT?
Minister.
The Senator is inviting me to tell this Parliament and the world, including those who use drones to breach our security systems, what we are doing to deal with it. I have given some indications. He wants to, it sounds to me like the Senator wants to encourage the undermining of the national security. I couldn't say all of that. I have already indicated that it is a problem, and we are attending to it with great levels of success. Thank you.
Senator Mark.
That's why I say criminals have friends everywhere.
Senator Mark.
Yeah, Mr. President. Yeah, Mr. President. May I?
Senator Nakid.
Yeah.
Senator Mark.
Yeah, Mr. President, may I ask the Honourable Minister, given the number of reported contract killings as reported and never denied by the state coming from behind prison walls, can the minister share with this Honourable Senate what efforts have been made to get at the source of those particular deadly contracts that have been issued, resulting in the deaths of people? What activities has the state engaged in to get at the source of this?
So, Senator Mark, that question has been asked and answered. Do you have another supplemental?
Okay. It has been asked. I'll pause at this time and ask Senator Richards.
Senator Dr. Paul Richards.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. seems our kumbaya moment from yesterday did not carry through today. Question through you, Mr. President. Question number 93 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is important to note that the approval and/or grant of a firearm user's license to private security companies is done by the Commissioner of Police in accordance with Part 2 of the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601 of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. In this regard, each private security company can only be granted one FUL, from which the Commissioner of Police can then grant several FUECs, Firearm Users Employees Certificates for their respective employees. Accordingly, with respect to item 1 of the question, part 1, the Commissioner of Police has advised that a total of 89 private security companies have been granted FULs. In relation to part 2, the 10 private security companies with the largest number of Firearm Users Employees Certificates granted under the FULs, as I explained, are Amalgamated Security Services Limited with 570, Allied Security Limited with 282, Elite Security Consultants 195, Executive Bodyguard Services 176, Fortress Security Services Limited 167, G4S Security Services Limited, 142, Imgin Security Services Limited, 129, Innovative Security Services Limited, 113, SWAT Estate Police Company Limited, 109, and Telecom Systems Limited, 102, totaling 1,985 altogether. Thank you.
Senator Richards.
Mr. President. Thank you, Minister, for the response. Given the numbers that the Minister has articulated, which I appreciate, of the 89 private security companies having received FULs and their consequent FUECs, and the fact that those are just the top 10 you identified, resulting in 1,985 FUECs, which doesn't contemplate the remainder of the 89. Is the Minister satisfied with the level of oversight, monitoring, and management of the weapons and ammunition reposed with these companies, identified and others, given the consequent FUECs and weapons and ammunition that would be dispersed and used by these private security companies?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, this minister in the generality is aware of the concept of the phenomenon of diversion, meaning where legal arms and ammunition stockpiles are inadvertently, illegally, criminally sometimes, negligently even, they move from legal hands and use to illegal hands, misuse and abuse. So in that circumstance, I'd never be satisfied. In addition to that, we have had experiences in Trinidad and Tobago where lawful, law enforcement held firearms and ammunition have been diverted, as a matter of fact. And we are working with our international partners on that. You would have seen sometime last year, I did the symbolical destruction of a firearm at the police academy. That was one of about 7,000 for physical destruction, and that destruction process is ongoing in order to ensure that these arms and ammunition, no longer in use, the end result of court cases ordered destroyed by the court, are destroyed so that they will not be diverted to criminal hands. So in answer to the senator's very useful question, yes, there's an issue of diversion. Yes, action is being taken. Even this government, and we have on the Senate order paper, a bill to regulate the private security industry. I presented it. We went to a joint select committee with the UNC. They sat in that committee for 9 months, agreed with everything. And when we came back on the parliament floor to debate that bill, as we must, to regulate the industry, dealing with regulating the firearms and ammunition that they hold, that united National Congress. This is why it is said, the criminals seem to have friends everywhere. And I say so without apology. They stood up in this parliament and signaled their objection to that law. But we will persist, Mr. President, in order to ensure that...
Members. Again, the Minister of National Security has the floor. Senator Richards is the one who is on the floor to ask the supplementals. Minister, are you finished with your response? Continue.
Just have a few more words in conclusion, simply to say that we will continue in the protection of the state, in the protection of the people, and simply doing that which is good and right to ensure that we continue to take action to prevent the concerns quite properly raised by the senator in the question in front of us. I thank you.
Senator Richards.
Mr. President, for the response. Given the minister's response in the present crime scenario in the country and the acknowledgement of the phenomenon of divergence as the Honourable Minister has described, and the potential for criminality being exacerbated by that phenomenon, and the minister's response about the work with external partners, is the minister satisfied with the level of resources and mechanisms presently in place to monitor and interdict those occurrences of diversions in the country?
Minister.
Mr. President, we have a serious crime problem in Trinidad and Tobago and the region and the world. We do have a problem. And as Minister of National Security, as a citizen of this republic, and as a man, I cannot say that I'm satisfied with the problems that beset us. What I can also say is that as minister, as citizen, we will continue to exert best efforts. This government gives the assurance from our record, from our efforts, that we will continue to work and exert best efforts at creating a safer and more secure environment for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to live, have fun, and operate in. I thank you.
Senator Richards.
Question in this set. Through you, Mr. President, can the minister indicate if, given his acknowledgement of this phenomenon of divergence and security companies who have lawful FULs and consequent FUECLs, if any charges have been proffered or criminal prosecution entered into regarding the identification of such security companies that are engaging in this, what I presume is criminal activity and dangerous activity of divergence?
Well, criminal liability largely is about personal liability. In other words, if a police officer, if a soldier, if an estate constable belonging to one of the firms I've dealt with here today commits an offense, in all cases, when something untoward happens, an investigation ensues. For example, recently, a soldier is reported to have gone down in the West and took the lives of 2 citizens. All other matters of that nature would be investigated. The divergence where that applies will be identified, and prosecution will not be in that case against the defense force or against a security firm, but against the individual. And I would want to remind the senator that there are many officers, estate police officers, prison officers, who have been the subject of investigations, charge and prosecution in Trinidad and Tobago in these respects.
Senator Richards, you have one. Senator Mark.
Mr. President, may I ask the Minister of National Security that in the absence of a legislative framework and the absence of proper monitoring, is it safe to conclude that the private security industry, of which we are talking about 85, having access to FUL and 89, can it be concluded, and the minister can advise on this matter, that the armada of weaponry controlled by the private security industry exceed that of the state security services in Trinidad and Tobago?
I think not. But I can't say with any greater accuracy than that, but I think not.
Senator Dr. Paul Richards.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 94 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you yet again, Mr. President. On the basis of information received from the Commissioner of Police, I here state that the existing registers at the firearms permit unit were not designed to capture the occupation of an applicant firearm user's license holder. Additionally, due to the records not being fully digitized, every approved file pertaining to FULs must be physically scrutinized to ascertain the requested information. In this regard, as it pertains to information requested as at parts 1 and 2 of the question, the following information can be provided. FULs approved for the period 2011 to 2023, insofar as business owners are concerned, amongst the 1,145. In respect to other private citizens, 2,168, with a total of 3,313. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is currently undertaking a firearm user's license renewal process, which requires persons to indicate their occupation on the renewal application form. As such, the present figures for both categories will only be known when all the FUL holders have completed the renewal process. As such, the actual figures for currently active FULs in both categories may vary from the quoted figures, as the FUL holder's status may have changed. Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can the Minister indicate in similar fashion to the question posed in question 93 regarding the oversight mechanisms, given now we have information about private security companies and the phenomenon of divergence, and that potentially being transferred to private citizens and or businesses, excluding private security companies, if the oversight mechanisms are sufficiently in place to monitor these FULs and the attendant ammunition reposed with these individuals?
Minister.
Under the Firearms Act, the Commissioner of Police and those to whom she delegates some of her authority and power, the police are mandated to monitor the stock of arms and ammunition, the use of arms and ammunition in the country. One of the ways in which they do that is to visit regularly and observe the records of the firearm dealers, those who import under license and distribute in the country, always watching to see that which they have in stock and how they distributed those that have gone out of their stock. And of course, for the firearm users license holder or FUEC holder, again, the private security companies are similarly monitored and audited. And the bill that I spoke about, the private security industry bill, is specifically geared towards that, allowing an inspector, an office who would be come into existence under that act if the UNC lends it its support, would be able to go and visit and check up on the private security holders to see what they have, how they're using it, and how they keep them safe. As for private persons with FULs and FUECs, the individuals, they have to come in from time to time on an annual basis for the licensing of the firearm, and every 3 years for renewal of the license. So this allows the police service to see the weapon, check the serial number, check the number of rounds, and there's a record of what you used, whether it was in training or otherwise, and what you would have purchased. So there's that overall monitoring that ought to take place in respect of the valid concerns of the Honorable Senator. Thank you.
Senator Richards.
Thank you. Can the minister indicate if it is taking place effectively?
Minister.
Well, from where I stand, I pray, I'm confident that it does, but I do have information that in some cases, for example, I don't think I want to get into it now because some of those matters are before the court, but there are several examples of where that kind of monitoring was not successfully executed, and the results of that monitoring had not been secured. Thank you.
Senator
I can give
Jones.
examples if he
Thank
wishes.
you. Minister, final question is this said. Can the minister indicate if an intonation at a recent Joint Select Committee suggesting that the monitoring of, in particular, levels of ammunition dispersed by dealers is not being accounted for as effectively as it should, posing danger to citizens should that ammunition get into the wrong hands?
Minister.
Based on information available to me, in the 3 inquiries that this government initiated when news came to us about abuse and mismanagement and a white-collar criminal enterprise under the nose of a former commissioner, I have reason to believe that it has not been properly monitored, and I agree with the implication of the question that things in some ways fell askance.
As supplemental.
Senator,
A final supplement on this. Can the minister indicate what steps are being taken to rectify that very dangerous situation?
Minister.
I did indicate a while ago that the Commissioner of Police has, for the first time, I understand some people to be saying, implemented a provision of the law that requires renewal, written in the law, you know, every 3 years. That is a part of the process. Apart from this, I am aware the police are mandated under the law and under the direction of the National Security Council as part of the government's policy on behalf of the people of this country to carry out their duty in terms of interdicting firearms, in terms of retrieving illegal firearms, and all the other things that form part of proper policing activity in a modern society that they must do in order to achieve the kind of safety and security that the Senator is alluding to quite properly.
Senator Richards.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question number 95 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Again, I thank you very warmly, Mr. President. Again, on the basis of information received from the Commissioner of Police, the following data is relevant. The registers utilized by the TTPS Firearms Permit Unit were not created to capture, question 95? Yeah. They were not created to capture the occupation of new applicants existing firearm holders. Firearm holders at the time of the application. Consequently, the figures supplied by the TTPS represent overall applications comprising private citizens, business owners, and private security companies. In this regard, the total number of FULs...
Senator Naked, allow the minister to proffer his answer, please. Continue, Minister.
In this regard, the total number of FUL applications made during the period 2018 to 2023 amounted to 13,042, which is disaggregated as follows. For the year 2018, there were 1,722 applications. In the year 2019, 3,217. In the year 2020, 3,337. In the year 2021, 3,190. In the year 2022, 651. In the year 2023, 925. While the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service's overall digitization process is underway, the FUL files have not yet been fully digitized, which means that every one of the files pertaining to FUL applications would have to be physically scrutinized to ascertain the category of the applicant. One would appreciate the time-consuming nature of this process. In addition to digitizing the existing files, the TTPS has informed that the capturing of this information at the time of the application would be done. In respect of Part 2, as regards to Part 2 of the question, TTPS records relating to the approved FULs reveal that during the period 2018 to 2023, a total of 3,547 private citizens were granted FULs, disaggregated as follows. 2018, 216. 2019, 534. 2020, 1,462. 2021, 1,271. 2022, 47. 2023, 17. Mr. President, story is being told. Thanks.
Then, can the minister indicate, given the fact that the balance of FULs awaiting renewal in the time period expressed 2018 to 2023, with the 13,042 applications and the 3,000 or so granted, there is a disparity of, an abeyance of 9,495. Can the minister indicate those that are awaiting renewal? What is the policy for those FUL holders who are awaiting renewal? Is it that they're supposed to give their weapons and ammunition back in? What is the policy practice related to that?
Minister.
It is not within my understanding that while these matters are pending, the citizens are required to return firearms. It is not within my understanding that that is the case. But I can have that matter specifically clarified if the senator would permit me the time to do that.
To you, Mr. President, can the minister indicate if there is a concern, given that while these 9,000 plus persons are awaiting renewal, that these firearms initially legally reposed with them because of the FULs they would have been granted before, are now staying with them in addition to the consequent ammunition in their possession, potentially in some cases posing a danger?
Minister.
I quite admittedly, I lost you. What could you restate? What the problem were you aiming at?
The concern through you, Mr. President, is that the persons who would, these 9,000 persons would have had legal access to own firearms and ammunition through their FULs. And now they are awaiting renewal. In the public domain, there's information that the renewal process has been protracted, and you indicated that the procedure or practice may not have been to return or to repose those firearms and ammunition with the TTPS. Is there a concern that those firearms are now reposed with the owners without the requisite legal firearm users license active?
Well, they are now, from my understanding, in possession of a firearm holder's license, a firearm user's license. They are in possession of that. So it is not that the possession as we speak in the context that the senator raised that is improper or illegal. The administrative process for the renewal, there would have been a timeline for the application to be made. Once the citizen did that, if it is pending, meaning it is being dealt with in the police service, protracted or otherwise, and it ought not to be protracted, but if it turns out that it is, meanwhile, it cannot be deemed that the person is not legally in possession of a firearm. That's my understanding. And again, that is, to my mind, quite logical, quite sensible.
Through you, Mr. President, can the minister indicate if additional resources have been provided or supplied to deal with the backlog, if I can classify it as that, of 9,000 plus renewal applications?
Minister.
As Commissioner of Police, that office holder is set with the responsibility to administer the Firearms Act and to manage the police service. How she does that is entirely a matter for her. I am not in a position to say what she has done. What I can say is that from her public utterances and from any other source, that she is making efforts, serious efforts, sometimes inspired by court judgments, to get the business of the administration of these issues done expeditiously.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, question number 65 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Tourism, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, the response is as follows. The progression of this country's probable and possible reserves into the proved P1 category is contingent upon the continued investment of operators in the oil and gas sector in technical and geological data, such as seismic surveys, seismic reprocessing, and well testing, or by the approval of investment plans that may unlock reserves associated with compression, appraisal drilling, or infill drilling, to name a few. The Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, as part of its continuous management and development of the country's hydrocarbon resources for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, continues to facilitate plans for such work being pursued by oil and gas operators. The Ministry encourages operators to fully replace or increase their proved P1 reserves by regular adjustments to the tax regime to improve development economics by enforcing technical work commitments within the production sharing contracts, and by facilitating the removal of contingencies that obstruct the exploitation of our reserves. For example, the government successfully negotiated an agreement